Ed succeeded Gary as the head men's basketball coach of the Eagles and posted a then record 109 career wins. He is a graduate of the Washington College of Law at American University and is currently the Director of Player Personnel for the Washington Wizards of the NBA. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ed Tapscott.
What a great day. Wonderful, wonderful day. And I'm delighted to be here. Dr. Kerwin, Keith, Dave, members of this committee, fellow Hall of Fame members. This is a wonderful day to induct two leaders of men, two wonderful leaders of men. Let me pause and congratulate the Wells family. I know Dickie Wells through Will Jones. Now I know a different Dickie Wells, by the way, to hear all the things that Ed, you corrected Will on. Ed, I'd like to thank you too, because I have never wanted to follow Will Jones to the podium, ever. I'd also like to say, Will, you remember that money that popped out when you saw Gary and Dickie when you were there coaching? I got that pile of money. All right, I grabbed it. I was assistant then. I grabbed that money. And I have three players here who will attest to the fact that we did distribute that money. All right. In talking about Gary Williams, I wanted to talk about several things. Gary would be in this Hall of Fame simply on resume alone. In fact, I applaud AU for making this possible because you're ahead of the next Hall of Fame that should have him as a member, and that one's up in Springfield, Massachusetts. If you just looked at Gary's resume, if you just looked at the things he's accomplished since he started here at American University, and we spent the better part of this day already speaking to the issue of what a different era it was. Yes, we were still in Fort Myer, the only gymnasium in the country with a wind chill factor. Every game, as these gentlemen from AU know, was a away game. We packed vans with everything you need, from towels to Gatorade buckets to everything you would need, and travel over to Fort Myer, go through the security there to have a basketball game. I remember I happened to be coaching here when we opened Bender Arena. And I walked out to the locker room and thought, somebody better get a van quickly, drive me around the campus. I've never coached a game without getting out of a van. And Gary really ushered in what I call the modern era of American University basketball. You think about this, just before Gary started, there was no ESPN. There was no Big East. And all of a sudden, within the time that we started here and before Gary left, there was a Big East and there was an ESPN. And he made sure that American University was still relevant when all these major developments were going on in college basketball. And with that, I'm sorry I got to do this. I thought I put the type large enough, but the years don't make it possible. If you take a look at Gary's record, he was 72-42 here at AU. 72-42. 24 wins in his third season, 21 wins in the next, 2 NIT appearances. He goes on to win 668 games in his career. Holds the record at the University of Maryland, 452. I can assure you that in all of those games, according to Gary, we were never the favorite. But when talking about Gary and going through his resume, it's easy to go there. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about Gary, the man, the coach that you don't know, the guy that you don't know. Now, Gary has been known to have a rather aggressive coaching style, as many of you know. Yet I will say to you that if you've ever watched Gary coach, and I had a chance to watch him up close, sitting right next to him, in all of the histrionics and the emotion that you see, I have never seen a coach who can go from pirouettes that lose money to a guy who is absolutely brutally efficient and analytical in terms of telling his team what he needs done. 3 seconds before, he's spun, he's pirouetted, he's thrown his fist at the referee, the players hit the bench, and right away, here's what we need to do. It's an amazing thing that he could always do. I found it amazing that he could do that. And some years later, when he was at Maryland, I happened to be there in my capacity as a scout for the NBA. They asked me in an interview at halftime, what difference do you see after all these years in Gary Williams' coaching style? I thought for a moment and I said, he sweats through a better suit. You know, Maryland allowed him to buy a little bit better haberdashery, you know? But it was that passion for the game that he never lost, not right up until the last game of his career. That passion for the game, that competitiveness that drove him and his teams, that inspired his teams. Because I can assure you that when we were here at AU, we did not have a host of McDonald's All-Americans. In fact, I don't think McDonald's All-Americans existed at that time. But we had tough, gritty, passionate, inspired players. And that's what allowed us to win games. And that's what came through from Gary Williams, that passion. Now, there is another Gary that I will tell you has one of the greatest senses of humor you will ever see. Just a terrific sense of humor. It's not something most people talk about with Gary Williams, but he always had time for a laugh. He was always a guy who took pride in making sure he could keep this in perspective. And I can assure you, on many road trips, one of the skills that Gary developed in his many years of coaching is he knew the flip side of every 45 ever played on Top 40 radio. Now, for you young people, a Top 45 is a record, okay? It's made, out of plastic, and they put it on a turntable, and they put a needle on it. You guys wouldn't know. Look it up in your history books, all right? But Gary knew every tune, but he knew the flip side. And he won a lot of money with the flip side concept when we were amongst other coaches. We once had a player, and I want to sort of regale you with small stories, not big stories of his accomplishments, because those are well chronicled, but small stories. We once had a player here at American by the name of Ray Vokel. Some of these guys over here remember Ray Vokel. Ray Vokel set an NCAA record while he played for the Eagles, the most consecutive field goals made in a row. And Ray couldn't shoot a lick. If you left him in an empty gym with a ball and told him he couldn't shoot the ball in the lane, you'd have to go get him sandwiches. He would be there that long. But he got on a streak. And I think the record at that time was 17, right, Gary? And he got to 19, all right, and broke the record, and then got a shot blocked. Got a shot blocked, and the record was finished. He was finishing at 19. And we're playing a fairly important opponent. I don't remember who it was, but it's a tight game. And the fierce, more aggressive side of Gary Williams was in full display. And on the very next possession, Ray Vokel came down the floor and let loose with a 25-foot jump shot. One he has probably never taken before and certainly hasn't taken since. And he ran by the bench and said, "Man, I've been waiting to do that for the longest time." And I looked up, shaking, like, what is Gary going to do? And Gary turned to the bench and said, "I guess we owed him that one." And we had a laugh, and the game went on. Do you remember that, Gary? Those are the things that those of us who work with a Dickie Wells or with a Gary Williams, we remember these little things, these little vignettes that bring personality and remembrance and fond memories to what we attribute to these wonderful, wonderful men. And so, before I close, I'd like to talk to you very quickly about the Gary Williams family. In coaching, we are all part of a family, a larger group of people that we influence, who we associate with, who help us, and we reach out and help them. I'm part of the AU family. One of my good friends Coach Will Jones. Now, I heard him referred to as Willie. You never told me they called you Willie. You told me Will.
Well, it get written about the shorter your name is.
Okay.
more often.
Okay, I get it. So, but that's part of being the AU family. And then the subset to that is the Gary Williams family. And he is a family of rather extraordinary people. One of the other assistant coaches during our era, Jay Mottola, is here today. Jay, where are you? There's Jay. Jay is the head of the Metropolitan Golf Association in New York. He left here and went to golf. Smart man. There's a gentleman who coached with us, Frank DeLeo. He now scouts in the NBA. Fran Dunphy, a wonderful, accomplished coach, Temple University. All members of the Gary Williams family. Chris Nockey, who I'm sure you've heard on radio if you ever listened to a Maryland game. Gordon Austin, who's here. Freddie Yon, Jimmy Lutz, former players. Here are the other coaches of note who've come out of the Gary Williams family. Rick Barnes, who's now the coach at the University of Texas. Fran Fischilla, who does television for ESPN. Of course, Fran Dunphy, I mentioned. Jimmy Patsos, who's the coach over at Loyola, Maryland, who, by the way, is in the thick of it to win his league this year. Mike Lonigan, who's now the coach at, dare I say, at GW. How could he go so wrong, Gary? Dave Dickerson, who was the coach at Tulane, is now the coach at Ohio State, assistant coach. Chuck Drizel, who was part of Gary's staff at Maryland, who now coaches at the Citadel. Billy Hahn, who's now assistant at West Virginia, was once the head coach at LaSalle. And there's several people in the NBA who I work with. One is Randy Ayers, who was my assistant when I had my 1 year on the bench, forgettable year, by the way, on the bench with the Wizards, and is now an assistant coach in New Orleans. And Paul Brazo is vice president of basketball operations at the NBA. We're all parts of the Gary Williams family. We are all proud members of the Gary Williams family. And we are prouder still today because Gary, rightfully and finally, has been inducted into the Cassell Hall of Fame. And as a member of that family, I stand a little prouder today because I was delighted to be inducted. But I stand a little prouder and a little taller because I'm now in with Dickie Wells and with Gary Williams.